Thanks for joining us again. Another Thrill Me podcast short here. Friend of the show, Ali, jumped on to Instagram the other day when I put out a post about getting The Last of Us Part 2 and sort of threw it at us to review that. Jared is with me. We're actually going to review both games because, like me, Jared, I believe you punched through Part 1 first. Is that correct?
I did. I went back and re-downloaded it and, pushed through that. I actually had Last of Us 2 in hand, so I had to kind of restrain myself and put that off to the side and go back through the first one again. It took me about 4 days, I think, and then I went on to Last of Us 2.
Yeah, I jumped the gun early. I grabbed it off PSN about a week and a half before Last of Us 2 was released. So I was just about there when the sequel turned up on the doorstep. But so look, it'll just be
I had the same thinking, but I was right in the thick of Days Gone, and I had to take a couple of days to push through that because I didn't want to leave it in the middle. So I just finished. That must have felt like a bloody, like, in comparison, just an absolute pile of poop. I wouldn't go that far, but fair to say portions of it were a slog in comparison.
Yes. Well, look. What we're going to do is just run our eye over both games and give our thoughts. We will score them. I think we'll keep spoilers to a minimum.
Oh, fuck. I reckon we go straight into it, mate.
I reckon it's difficult. Obviously, we're going to have to spoil some things, perhaps.
Look, put it this way. Anyone that wants to play The Last of Us has seemingly purchased a copy because it's sold like fucking gangbusters. So I don't think we're going to ruin it for anyone that's been hanging on there.
No. But I will say, spoiler alert before we get started.
Yeah, definitely.
We will spoil some things about it, and that's, if you're not comfortable with that, just I would avoid this before you've played until after you've played the game. But look, for me, Jared, going back to the first one, I was pretty impressed again by doing it because, look, I hadn't played it for a while and I forgot it was actually made in 2013. So it's 7 years old, which felt weird because opening it up, I thought aesthetically it was actually pretty good and graphically, like, it's still quite good.
Yeah, I felt
it lacks a bit of.
I felt that it was, considering, 7 years in video game. The video game world is an age, like the advancements and whatnot can really date some things pretty quickly. But I was the same. I was not so distracted by any of those things. Like, as you said, the aesthetics held up. Even the gameplay was still fairly solid, considering.
Yeah, the gameplay is a little clunky, and we'll get into how it, the differences when we get to part 2 as well, between the two games. But the key for this game for me is just the character work, the story, the emotional moments, because quite frankly, I almost fucking burst into tears at the start.
Yeah. The start, the opening of the game
hard.
is one of the most memorable experiences of any kind of those forms of media that I've had. And any of those zombie games and zombie movies, it puts you right in it.
Yeah, I love the way they take their time.
Yeah.
They never really rush anything at all.
No.
When it comes to the cinematic sequences that they pepper through. And at no point did I feel like skipping any of them.
No. And as you said, they don't even really rush this stuff, even though there's a massive sense of urgency while you're in it. They take their time to put you right in the thick of the breakout. There's that point where you're in Ellie's perspective, sitting in the back of the car, and the cinematic's essentially playing, but you can choose where you're looking, and you're looking out the front, and then there's a fucking house on fire on one side of the car, and it's just,
and then there's that sequence where they find that guy on the side of the road with his car breaking down.
Yep.
And Joel's just going, keep going, don't stop, keep going, And his daughter, I think it's Sarah, isn't it?
Yeah, sorry, not Ellie. It's
daughter.
Sarah, you're in Sarah's perspective.
It feels a bit like, takes a minute to get used to that when you first start the game, because it's another young teen girl, but it's his daughter.
Yeah, yep.
And then that moment where she gets killed.
Yeah. I mean, this is why I'm in favour of spoilers, because you can't really go into the games without talking about some of this.
But, the moment she dies, I mean, the whole part of that, I mean, the voice acting and the work by the actor who does Joel is fucking fantastic. Like, it wouldn't be out of place in a film.
No. And I mean, these guys
that's what I mean.
are experienced. Like, Troy Baker does a lot of the Batman, and I think he's actually done Batman and the Joker across various films for DC. So, and he's obviously done a bunch of video games. Like, they're well-respected veterans of the field, I guess.
Yeah, and that stuff is just delivered so well. Like, the voice work from all the characters is perfectly picked and fits the character beautifully, and it's just the cinematic stuff is, I mean, quite frankly, you could cut the gameplay out and still have a pretty emotional and action-packed type of film, really, if you just stitch together all the cinematics. So that's a real testament to the quality of it.
Well, I think that's one of the biggest things that even now, going back to it, and as you said, it doesn't feel like 7 years, but it still stands out as the one kind of experience that is as close as I've got to playing through like a movie, essentially. It's blended the best of both, There's lengthy cinematics, and as you said, you're never bored by them. You're itching to get, you're itching to experience them, to get the story happening, and the level of immersion that you get from actually playing through the levels and having those sequences where you're not necessarily doing a hell of a lot other than looking around a place and taking in the characters' perspectives on it. It's still even now it still stands out. And as you said, it's the emotions that it makes you feel. Like that's why you watch a movie. You want to feel something. And in terms of a video game, I've rarely got that sense of actually feeling those emotions to that level, or feeling the sense of urgency when something's going on. Yeah,
and there are just a number of sort of fantastic set pieces that you're involved in. I really like the one in the snow.
Yeah.
Where Ellie is captured. I think it still holds up now. There's stealth involved, but then there's also you dive into a little bit of just get it on, pull out the weapons and start firing.
Yeah,
and then it gets into that whole...
The weather kind of rises with the action, I suppose, like with what's going on, and the characters like drive to get something done. Like the weather kind of just fires up when that sort of stuff really kicks into gear and kind of packs on that emotional weight, and the as I've said, I've used it a couple of times, but the urgency of the situation. I mean, when I was playing through that level, I was edge of the seat. Like I was tapping my feet. I was just kind of like, you're still focused on what you're doing, but your body is just these tics are showing this anxiety and this fucking just this these little tics of you're actually mirroring the emotions of the characters.
Yeah, and I think that the way they kind of drip feed the relationship between the two of them.
Yeah.
Because Joel doesn't want to do it at the start.
Yeah.
And then he has Tess there to kind of like act as a buffer. So he doesn't really interact a lot with Ellie in that early phase.
Mm-hmm.
But it slowly builds that he realises he has to, and then he just can't hand her over when they get to Tommy's,
Yeah. Well, that development,
Tommy's out in
that development between them is really kind of felt in a couple of sequences.
Yeah, and then there's that fantastic bit where she's been kidnapped by those crazy fellas, and he's got the two of those guys captured, and he's walloping the living piss out of one of them.
Yeah.
And he point to where she is, and then the other guy points, and then he shoots him, and the other guy goes, "Oh, but what happens if he's not telling the truth?" And he just says, "I believe him," and then just fucking belts the other guy over the head. Yeah, that sort of stuff is just gold. It's just fantastic character development. It's beautiful. It's really, really well written. Dialogue feels natural.
Yeah, the dialogue in the story
I think
is awesome.
Yeah, and it's just one of these things. I think it's just heading, in a way, back in 2013, all I remember thinking was it's head and shoulders over the next best for me.
Yeah.
And that includes the Uncharted games. Like the Uncharted games took a similar approach. It's no surprise, the same company, which is Naughty Dog. But Uncharted wasn't quite as, I don't know, I guess maybe it was a little bit more sort of fun and loose.
Yeah, Uncharted was more sort of rollicking adventure, whereas this one was a roller coaster. It was taking you on that journey, and the beats to the story are just so good, so memorable.
Yeah. Very strong. And there's a couple of moments, as I said to you, there's a couple of moments I'd kind of forgotten that really add some weight to things.
Yeah.
For starters, the bit where they turn up to that small town that bloke's been hiding in.
Yep.
The guy who owes Joel money.
Yeah.
And when you first turn up there, it's dusk. The sun's going down. And just the look of the area, the way they've done it, it's just beautiful, There's a couple of times where I just stood, I was up, climbing buildings and stuff, and I just stopped.
Yeah.
To see the kind of the sunset and everything.
Yeah, the depth that they sort of put into it.
This looks fantastic. Yeah, the work and the effort that's been put in here. I mean, there's no stone unturned to make this as realistic as they can.
Yeah.
And so that's a really great, really just great aesthetically. But the other one for me was you've just been through absolute hell and fought those zombified and bloody clickers and all those bastards in these couple of big sequences down in the subway tunnels, I think. And then you finally get to you come out of the subway and you get out into the city and you're heading to the hospital. And then Ellie kind of gets all excited and there's like a big herd of giraffes that are now loose in the city, and they're eating from the trees and stuff.
Yep.
And I just thought to myself, this is such a good sequence because it's kind of like the music changes into something really nice. She gets really excited. And it's kind of like there's still some beautiful things in this world of absolute shit,
Yeah, well, I think that again, there's the themes in there that there's always, even though you're writing the shit a bunch of times, and Joel is, he starts off a broken man essentially. These themes of redemption and hope that are sort of present throughout, where you get these little moments. Another one of my favourites was, where they bump into Sam and his brother, and he wants to play with like the transformer looking thing, and it's just like these kids haven't seen a world that's not like this, but they're still kids, and you get these little moments of hope and these little glimpses into what they want and what could be if all goes to plan, and I think that's one of the strengths.
It's juxtaposed against some of the letters that you find.
Yeah,
that
exactly.
are absolutely harrowing.
Yeah.
Things where the kids have been left behind by their parents. Like there's one sequence where you end up in like the suburbs.
Yep.
And you're walking through the houses. That's with Sam and his brother. And there's one house that has these letters, this letter that says that Dad has gone looking for food. He told us not to open the door and all this sort of shit. And I'm just thinking, fuck, they do get the emotions going.
Yeah, exactly.
Which sounds weird in a computer game because the idea is that computer games are kind of lifeless, so to speak.
Well, and this is the thing. This is, it's funny that I mentioned Days Gone, and I don't want to give Days Gone a kicking because I did enjoy the game and I got value for money out of that. But as I said to you a couple of times, the difference between a game like that and a game like this is that they went for the grand story and it just didn't work. Like whenever there was moments of that character going through his journey to where he needed to go and to do with his wife, I was just like, I can't wait for this to finish and I'll just go and shoot some zombies again. Yeah. Whereas this one was the opposite. It was the perfect mix, as you said. Whenever there was these moments of tension and where you just edge of your seat, they would bring it back and they would slow it down and they would have a sequence where Ellie and Joel are just walking along the street and talking and advance the story that way. just the balance was just spot on almost all the way through.
Yeah, exactly. And to me, those moments are what puts this over the top of all those other games set in that sort of a post-apocalyptic world or zombies and stuff like that. It's the effort put into the character and the story that puts it over the top.
Yeah, definitely.
And for me personally, if I'm rating this one, I give it 5 out of 5.
I would probably be the same.
I think back then it was the best game I think I'd ever played.
Yeah.
And then playing it again, I just kind of went, I can see why I love this so much.
Yeah, I've still got the same sort of feelings. Things that I didn't think worked so well in amongst some of the gameplay, but when I look down to it, I think, could I have asked for much more out of the experience? And I couldn't. The gameplay was up to par enough when it needed to be, and the story and the as I said, it took you on a ride, and you were right there for it. You were invested in the characters in a way that barely any game and even very few movies have ever got you to do. And you were just hanging on every little thing that happened. And going into big spoiler stuff, the ending is just an all-time classic.
Oh, absolutely gold.
Yeah,
absolute gold.
It's simultaneously like gut wrenching, but asking you what do you think? What do you think you would do? And you wouldn't do it different. It's the same thing. The connection with the characters there was so strong, and because you had gone through it for, I think the first one was about 15 hours or something like that.
Yeah,
because you'd gone through it for that length of time, you were right there with him. You were charging in there in the room with him.
Yeah, and just the whole thing where she says, he shot. I can't remember her name now. Is it Martha or Martine or something?
I think it's Martha.
The lady.
I can't remember. It does start with an M, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, she got them on the road with Ellie.
Yeah.
She was the one who set them up to take Ellie.
Yep.
And then right at the end, she comes out to try and stop him, and he shoots her. And as he puts Ellie in the car, he hears her. She's still alive, and he comes over towards her, and she says, "Please leave me, don't kill me."
Yeah.
And he just kind of looks at her and goes,
Marlene,
but you'll just come after her. Marlene, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And he just says, "You'll just come after her," and just shoots her in the head. And I thought it's such a tough ending, but it just leaves this issue hanging in the air.
Yeah, yeah.
I didn't even expect a sequel. So personally, initially I was thinking this still ends okay because it's ambiguous.
Well, that was the thing. It could have left it there, and the ending still would have worked. Like, it was open for more.
Yeah.
But the ambiguity of it still worked. The way that it left it hanging, it was all still very satisfactory, and you could your imagination could fill in the blanks for you.
Yeah. The whole idea that he lied to her.
Yeah.
He lied to her. He could have. They could have saved humanity for the loss of one little girl's life, but he wouldn't do it. And I think that it sort of leaves that kind of, what would you do, as you said, what would you do in this situation?
Yeah, and because as you said, it's all set up from the beginning that he couldn't go through it twice. He couldn't lose the girl that had sort of taken the place of his daughter, basically.
And they've spent 15 hours making you feel that relationship growing.
Yeah.
And so when it gets there, you think, he should save her.
Yeah, well, that's right.
It's not a choice. He should stop them.
Yep.
So that's a fantastic, to me, a fantastic way to end it. And I would have been very happy if it was just one game.
Yeah, absolutely.
So for me, 5 out of 5.
Yeah,
definitely.
I'm the same.
Of course, they couldn't stop at one game.
No, well, why would you?
As the cash registers began to read.
Look at them. Look at the amount they've sold on this one. What?
Yeah, I know.
You couldn't leave it at one, could you?
5 million in 3 days.
Yeah. And we're talking.
So,
that's in Aussie dollars, that's what I paid. What, $70 a pop at 5 million.
Yeah, it's a lot of money.
Yeah,
Lot. But Last of Us Part 2 came out, only like a week ago, wasn't it? 2 weeks ago.
yeah, a bit over a week. It's closing in on 2 weeks.
Ago. First things first on this one, graphically, absolutely outstanding.
Yeah,
Like,
it's the same thing as you said before. You stop and look sometimes.
Yeah, but just the motion capture and all that shit that they've done is as realistic as they can get it, I reckon. The human faces even look, human.
Well, just hold off on that because the PS5 will be out, in the next 12 months or so. You might be looking back on this going, Jesus, what were we talking about?
Well, you know what they'll do though? They'll do a re-up.
Yeah,
they'll do Last of Us Part 2 for PS5.
Well, that's essentially what they did for PS4. Like, supposedly this was, The Last of Us 2 was going to be like a grand swan song for their sort of Sony exclusive titles to lead into the PS5.
Yeah. So visually and aesthetically and graphically, the game is just unbelievable.
Yeah.
And the effort and work that has gone in to get it that way is phenomenal. And again, 7 years have passed, so I can see that I suggest they started work on this fairly soon after the first one was a hit, and so it's really been sort of gestating for quite some time. It hasn't been pulled together in a couple of years, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So the work and the effort is there on the screen. It's probably twice as long.
Yeah, I think it's 30.
Which I've got good and bad things on that.
Yeah, same. Yep.
I loved it. I couldn't, I couldn't put it down in a sense of every afternoon I came home from work and I was like, beauty.
Straight on.
Jump in for a couple of hours. Yep.
Yep.
And that extra 15 hours is still worthwhile. My problem with that extra 15 hours is there's a little bit of repetition and there's a little bit of bloat.
Yeah.
That seeps in.
I definitely felt the repetition through some of the combat sequences, I guess you could call them.
They do a pretty damn good job to mix it up. They throw in some fresh shit. I mean, those shamblers, fuck.
Yeah, and that fucking
shamblers.
The bloody Rat King. Jesus Christ.
Oh, yeah. And those strange ones that look like clickers, but they run around.
Yeah.
They run away from you.
Yeah. What were they called?
Pains in the ass.
Stalkers. Yeah, absolute bastards.
Because they come in and you think, I'm going to get it on.
You'd see them
and then they take off.
Yeah, they'd piss off and then they'd start sneaking around, but they didn't show up on your listening mode. So you'd be standing there like you'd think, where are they? And then you just hear,
a couple of times I was like, yeah, all clear. Walk into a room and something fucking on. And what you do is you give them a bit of a touch up and then they piss off on you.
Yeah, that's
right.
You'd
be like, oh shit. Yeah.
Yep.
So I think that they did a really good job updating the enemies.
Yeah, and I think there was there was actually a couple of sequences where which I didn't get so much of in the first game, where you would be sort of stuck for a second and someone would be saying, I'll get the door open.
Yeah.
Just bear with me. And you'd be stuck in a room for 1 to 2 minutes with these things just fucking streaming through windows. So, yeah, as you said, they mixed it up. They mixed it up really well.
Yell at the screen, open the fucking door.
Yeah. You know what I was a big fan of too? I did this a couple of times. I placed one of those motion activated bombs. And the second that I placed it,
too close to
one had come charging in from the side and blow the thing up while I was still sitting on top of it. Which was always good fun. Never resulted in me, letting a few four-letter words fly and throwing the controller on the ground or anything like that.
Jesus, yeah. But you know what, though? Yes, it adds. There's a bit of bloat there and there's a little bit of repetition. But I'm not going to lie, as far as the intensity of those combat sequences. I mean, there are times where you are just working with the light from your torch.
Yeah.
And there is fucking noises from left and right. And,
Yeah.
and you don't know where people are coming from, and you can't pinpoint, even if you're using your hearing, you've got those stalkers in the room.
Yeah, you still have to like turn around to see all of them. Sometimes it's like 360 and you'll be handling it and one of them will just grab you from behind or something like.
I mean, I told you there were several times where I was just like, I need to get out of here. This needs to end.
Yeah.
I was the intensity of the battles. I was just like, when's this shit gonna end?
You felt like you were actually in a zombie apocalypse.
Yeah, and not in a bad way. Like I wasn't saying, "Fuck, this is boring."
No,
I was saying, I can't handle it.
Yeah. Well, I was the same. Like when it was done well, I was feeling what they wanted me to feel. Like that relentless pressure was just coming and coming, and I'd be looking at my ammo stocks, and I'd be like, "Oh fuck, I've used all the shotgun shells and all the rifle shells. I'm down to 3 little handguns and a bloody couple of crossbow and things." And you would actually be sitting there, as you said, under the pressure and feeling the relentlessness of the situation, which is exactly what they were going for at those times when those sequences came in. And I think, again, for the most part, it got those emotions that it was looking for. But as you said, because the game was so much longer, there was less of the freshness to it by the time you went through some of those sequences for a second or third time.
And I also did like the fact that they mixed up they had the gangs.
Yeah.
The Scars and it was the WTF soldiers.
Yeah.
With different skills.
Oh, the fucking
and different
Scars
skill
and
sets.
they're whistling.
Oh. And then they come from the fucking clouds.
They come from everywhere.
They're all unbelievable. Like, and some of that stuff, I basically tried to do a bit of shootout work to start with, and then eventually just went, there's too many of them.
Yeah.
Like, they're everywhere. Bringing the dogs into play. As much as I didn't want to have to do that stuff.
Yeah.
You had to kill them. But it added another dimension, sniffing out your
scent. Well, that's right. You couldn't just sit in the same spot. When the dogs were around, you had to keep moving.
Yeah, you had to. But the storyline, again, is fantastic, and effort has been placed into it. And once again, I love the cinematic sequences. I never skip the cinematic sequences.
No, neither did I.
Even when it pairs off, and this is a major spoiler, it splits about halfway through into another character's perspective. Even then, I found that interesting because, in a way, Abby was the villain. Is that a fair assessment? Well,
that's the thing, yes. And, as you said, going into heavy spoilers, yes, her actions early on put her firmly in the villain category. She is the end goal for Ellie, essentially.
Yeah.
Killing her. But I thought it was, in some ways, it was a bit of a masterstroke to put her story out there and take some of the flashbacks and show that, hey, she was Ellie on her side of the story, on her side of the philosophies and the sides of what was going on. She was basically in Ellie's place, or had what Ellie had developed eventually with Joel, and she became the villain of someone else's story because they became the villain in hers.
Yeah, and the great thing about that was to kind of humanise that character.
Yeah. Again, it's that sort of that storytelling that I am quite interested in. Like, in the long run, her story didn't elevate it to a place where. And this is where it sort of drops from the first one for me a little bit, is it didn't reach the heights of that first game and the endings we achieved out of that first game. But it was still, the time you spent with her and the characters that you met through that portion of the journey, I guess, was still so much more worthwhile than so many of the other games that I've played.
Yeah. It just wasn't on par with what we got from Ellie's side of the house. Because even Ellie's story in this one, I still thought it had a shitload of emotional weight.
Yeah, it definitely did. One thing I will say is There was a hefty lack of the hope that I had in the first game. It was
Yes.
the violence and the
Oh, it was super dark.
yeah, the violence and the darkness of the whole thing
Super
was
dark.
just, again, relentless. And at parts, I was like fucking, I felt put upon to play some of the missions. But again, that's what Naughty Dog wanted me to feel through some of those parts, was that this fucking relentless pursuit of vengeance is never going to lead anywhere.
Yeah, and I think I totally appreciated that, because the first one was about finding hope in amongst shit, right? And the relationship between Ellie and Joel is kind of like this light in amongst all this darkness, right? But this one was about revenge, and it was just, they just doubled down on how dark it was going to be.
Yeah.
But I kind of dug that. You know what it reminded me of? It had stirs of John Creasy in Man on Fire. You know, just this relentless, I'm just going to kill everything.
Yeah.
Everything's going to die.
It did, but I guess that in the first one, Joel had a little bit of that. But
Yeah.
Ellie was the one that he was kind of trying to protect from that and to give her something that she hadn't had. Whereas this one...
But then I like the way they kind of shaped it, though, here, because all she saw was darkness
Yeah.
as she was older.
Yeah.
You know, suddenly the biggest, you know, again, spoilers, but to lose Joel
Mm.
in the way they do it, which is extremely nasty and extremely brutal in front of her, and then to also find out what she finds out about how Joel killed everyone on the hospital and left and told and lied to her.
Mm.
So you start getting all this stuff kicking up. So here's the ramifications of his actions in the end of the first one. They are basically just, it's a massive through line here.
Yeah.
And I loved that.
Which is one of the
great.
controversies around the game, it's probably fair to say, which to me I
Yeah.
find a little bit silly because,
Yeah.
I mean,
To me, it was still a gut punch.
natural
I felt it was
progression.
coming.
It's a natural progression of the story, right? That his actions had consequences for other people
Yes.
and lots
And
of
I
other
always
people,
felt-
you know?
I felt it was coming
Yeah. Well, that's...
as I started playing the game,
Oh.
because I realised, well, we're not playing in Joel's shoes here.
Well, I felt it was coming from the trailers, even though, and again, this has been a bit of a point of contention with some people, is that some of the sequences in the trailers were edited to sequences that appear in the game were edited with Joel in the place of other characters to make it seem like he was still there. But even when you looked at it, you were sort of thinking, what is it that's going to spark such a rage in her that you could see in the previews? And I couldn't help but keep coming back to, surely it's got to be like Joel dies. But you know, it was still a shock to the system because it was so early.
And it was a
and as you said, the fashion
kick in
that
the guts, and it was
the fashion that it happened in was brutal.
Yeah. And I loved it then set her on that path. But the thing was, she still had something to live for. But that was, again, this is what I loved about it. She still had something to live for.
But even then,
She still had Dina.
This is where the
but
hope
she
sort
couldn't
of-
see it.
Well, that's it. This is where there was the sort of lack of hope was there for me, is that even though she's got that, she still chooses the path of vengeance in the long run, you know?
Yeah. And I thought, for the most part, that stuff worked out well. I'll tell you one thing I liked about Abby. She loved to punch on.
Oh, yeah, huge.
I dug that you get into the stink with her. 'Cause she was like, she was more of a sort of a hand-to-hand. She had some hand-to-hand skills.
Yep.
So they actually throw in a couple of hand-to-hand punch-ups.
Yep.
And I love some of that, especially the first time you actually use her.
Yeah, I would have even liked a little bit more, like sequences where you came across a whole group of enemies that didn't have any weapons. Like, I would have loved a little bit more of that. But
she really lays the slip. Like, I was loving it in that first one where she's caught up with a few of the zombies, and I was just laying slippery left and right. I was loving it.
yeah,
It reminded me of Arkham Asylum.
Yeah, a little bit.
You could kind of come out of you could hit and then come out of it and
Yeah.
deliver to someone behind you or whatever. Like it was kind
it
of cool.
certainly
And I
wasn't
felt
as free flowing. The biggest strength of the Arkham games in that sense was you could get amongst it with like a group of however many you wanted to. Whereas this one never really got the chance to cut loose like that. But I did appreciate the lengths that they'd gone to actually include some of that.
Yeah, I would have loved like you, another sequence like that was more in keeping with something like Arkham, where she's got no weapons and she's got to take them on.
Yeah.
But overall, I felt it hit all the beats for me. I was thoroughly enthralled. You pointed out one particular sequence where you're up against the soldiers there, and then there's a car. You're trying to steal a car.
Yeah.
And then they're on your hammer, and it's a shootout. And quite frankly, it could have been in a bloody action movie.
Yeah, it could have. Absolutely.
It was so well shot, and
that's where
exhilarating.
That's where the breath picks up a little bit, the heart's pumping, and you sort of in the seat essentially. They show those ones from a sort of the first person perspective, and it really puts you right in the thick of it.
Yeah.
I mean, I can imagine that, we've played a couple of the VR games. If there was a sequence like that in some of the VR games I played, you'd just about be fucking blown off your chair. You're like, it was outstanding stuff.
And once again,
what about the, I don't know if you picked up on it, but I heard the developers say a little bit of something about this, is that the change in the title sequence, which is obviously sort of symbolic.
Yeah.
Supposedly the title sequence after you finish it is the island that Abby and Lev are headed to. So I guess it does end with a little bit of hope there. But even then, like the fingers, the symbolism of Ellie and the fingers, and essentially losing that connection to Joel, like she can't play the guitar anymore. It was fucking depressing. Even at the ending. Look,
it was oppressive. It was nasty. It was very, very violent. I think 10 times as violent as the first one.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it delivered all the way for me. I couldn't wait to keep playing it. I was this close to starting again after I finished it. Just starting all over again.
I needed an emotional break, to be honest.
I realised I needed an emotional break
when
I put Uncharted 4 in and sort of got sort of a bit more loose and sort of felt, I probably need a break from it. But I will definitely be going back to it very soon.
Yeah, I'll probably give it...
to play it again.
I'll probably give it some breathing room and maybe go back to it in a couple of years.
Yeah. But overall, to score it, I'm going to give it 4.5. It's not quite where the first one is. And the reason is because the first one is, as you said, it's got that little bit of hope. It's a little more emotional. I think it does a better job of building the characters and developing the relationships than this one does. And I sort of put it to you earlier on before we got on here. It's kind of like Terminator and Terminator 2. Terminator, for me personally, is the better film because the story is better, the characters are better. The effort put in there is what pushes it over the top. T2 is a very good film, and technologically it's streets ahead, which is the exact same thing here. But it's just that notch below, and the same applies here. This is one of the best games going around, no doubt. Would shit on 90% of the games out there.
Yeah.
But it's just not quite on par with the original.
Yeah, I think to me that's probably its biggest failing, is that it's had to follow up such a landmark sort of title. Like the first one was so good that it was going to be really difficult to follow it up with another absolute gem. But I feel like they got really, really close, and there was never any disappointment from me when I was playing it. I know there's been hefty criticisms of it. I can't really understand why. I know there's a couple of reasons that have put certain people offside, but I don't feel like they're legitimate reasons to be criticising the game in some arenas, I would say. But I feel like Yeah.
what you said about Joel's death, if you can't deal with, like, if you can't understand that this is about narrative integrity of the story,
Yeah.
his death. It's not about, oh, shit, we don't get to run around and shoot people as the character from the first game. Who gives a shit?
And I mean, to me, it provided an opportunity to spend more time as Ellie, who I also loved from the first game. So, you know, as we've sort of suggested there, it felt like that was the way to go. That they got what they needed out of that, and that mirroring Abby and Ellie was the story that they wanted to tell this time.
Yeah, and I thought they told it very, very well.
Yeah, I was okay with that.
So where do you feel? Where does it sit for you?
Yeah, 4.5 for me as well. Yeah, just a shade under the first one, if for nothing else than, as I said, it just felt like there were more times where it was more of a like you felt like you needed a break. There just wasn't those moments of hope throughout. There was a couple that they tried to go with and they didn't quite get there, I didn't feel like. Especially, I mean, if you played Left Behind, which I know you did the first time, but you skipped this time, in that 2 hours of the downloadable content for the first game, I felt like the relationship there and the little moments of those two discovering their sort of childhood or living their childhood through these moments that they never got in what we would term as, you know, the real world, the normal world, that they'd grown up in this shit from day one. I just felt like even in that 2 hours, it was just that relationship there was probably even better than what we had here for Ellie. Yeah. And so by just missing on those little things, that's really the only place that it fell down, the places that it fell down for me. But in saying that, I can't say that it's not it's an awesome game. I loved the experience of playing through it once again, and I would recommend it in a heartbeat to anyone that enjoyed the first game. So yeah, I don't know. I have a different perspective to some people clearly who didn't enjoy the game, but yeah, I just feel like they've really tried very, very hard with a narrative again and getting you on board with characters. And I mean, it was even more difficult this time because they're getting you on board with the you know, who they've set up as the villain of the piece. And I feel like by the end of it, they did.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, it's 4.5 for me.
Looking at these games, all of these games in isolation or as a group, this one sits snugly with things like Uncharted 4 and, you know, Grand Theft Auto 5 and some of these games that I really, really loved. But the first Last of Us stands above all of them. And that's a big call because GTA 5 was unbelievable. You know, I was a big fan of something like Call of Duty Modern Warfare. You know, all the Uncharted games, but The Last of Us is the one that I consistently, whenever I think about this, I always think, yeah, that's the best game I've ever played.
Yeah, I would agree that this one is very, very close. It's definitely in the upper echelon there. Like for me, I've got games like something like Arkham City sits right up there with The Last of Us 1 for me, but these particular games, you know, that's a personal sort of interesting. I love Batman as a character, and that was as good as we've ever gotten for him as a character in a game, and also one of the best games that I've ever sort of played through and spent time with.
Yeah.
But the Last of Us games sort of stand apart in terms of telling the story. Like they just
and let's face it, mate, you wouldn't be unhappy to play back to back like we did. Yeah, 45 hours of some of the best stuff you can get delivered.
No, absolutely.
So, you know, I certainly don't have any issues with the game. Yeah, fuck. I mean, the amount of hatred towards it, I think, is just strange. And I think maybe it's kind of like the hype. Some people were let down by some parts of it.
Yeah, and I think there's something in our culture now where you have to be, like some people just want to be contrarian for the sake of it, like to be the person that says this movie that everyone else says is phenomenal, you just sort of say it sucks without sort of justifying your position. And I mean, I've read a couple of reviews that weren't so favourable to it that gave legitimate reasons why they didn't like it, and some of them I see, but then some of them I didn't find to be as much of an issue, or some of them, you know, the relentless grimness of it all was sort of supposed to be there for the purpose of the story. So yeah, I don't know. There's some reasons that I feel are just not legitimate, and I'm not gonna give anyone a kicking for saying they didn't like it, but I just feel like there is a large section of people who are picking reasons that aren't necessarily, to me, legitimate for not supporting the game, I suppose.
Yeah, totally agree. All right, that's The Last of Us 1 and 2. Big thanks to Ali for bringing it up. Mate, thank you for letting us know, and it was good to talk about the two games. So, and anyone who's interested, definitely check them out. Most certainly the first one is absolute classic. This one is not far behind. So check them both out. It's definitely worth your time. But until then, take it easy, and we'll catch up with everyone later. Cheers. Find the podcast at Podomatic or on iTunes. Don't forget to rate and review. Like us on Facebook at Thrill Me Podcast Australia, or contact us at thrillme, all one word, all lowercase, at iinet.net.au.